Now here on page 43, just continuing the paragraph and the argument that we were working on in the top left, you see that the best of advanced and educated writers and thinkers, the chief scientists and the chief cultural people, are not much use because what they aim at isn't, when you compare it to what really matters, isn't very useful. But if the best aren't any use, then the less good. There's a crowd of less good people who are doing much worse, that much farther from utility. Next paragraph. Rousseau plays on the words. He says that the great mass of cultural people, of what we now call knowledge workers, are idle, and they are in the sense that what they do is no use, but in the other sense they're not idle, they're not lazy, they're very busy, but that's a drawback rather than an advantage for society. And here he picks up on a quality of people who make their living with mental and educated and artistic advanced things, that they have a certain pride in being original and unique and contrary to mass taste. If you think of the high value we would put on the word creative, that's a great term of praise in the modern world. But if you're creative, you're doing things that are unique to you because they haven't been done before. And Rousseau understands that as a great defect, right, that they relish paradoxical arguments going against common sense and popular opinion. And of course, their victims are the traditional religion and the traditional sense of right and wrong. So they have a certain contempt, so that they enjoy trolling, as we say now, undermining the things that are really important, the few simple things that Rousseau actually values: homeland, patriotism, and religion. And they're cynical and destructive in their arguments, and they tend to lower and take down what we should respect. And there's a clever bit of psychology that Rousseau understands here. It's not that they hate virtue or that they really despise those old things. But what they love is promoting themselves and seeing their unique thought. And this is what Descartes saw, that the church philosophers enjoyed their ability to climb so high into abstract things that they could win arguments where nothing was apparent and nothing was at stake. And that was a kind of pride that Descartes thought he could cure by introducing the scientific method. But Rousseau thought that he hadn't cured it at all. He just made it worse. And you could prove that, says Rousseau, by taking those people who are so proud of their idiosyncratic thoughts, so proud of their individuality, their opposition to mass taste and groupthink. And if you wanted to make them very religious again, all you'd have to do is expose them to a whole community of atheists. And then the things that they argue for now, they'd drop immediately and turn to the opposite. They'd become good religious believers because that would be the thing that distinguished them as higher thinkers. So the next paragraph here on page 43, the middle paragraph that spans both columns, Rousseau is making quite a contemporary point about the change in our politics, something we'll recognize if you'll think about how politics goes. He's talking about how politics and economics have merged, that politicians of the past talked about morality and virtue, but politicians of the present talk about economic growth and unemployment rates and that sort of things. And how did that change come about, and what's the meaning? Is it helping or hurting? So to begin, Rousseau goes back to his complaints about luxury. Scientific societies are luxurious, and luxurious societies are the kind that tend to become scientific. This is not very helpful because it keeps us idle in the sense that we don't do the few simple things that are most important, that are really good. But the difficulty is that the authorities, the people in charge now, make things worse where they used to help out. So the traditional society will have sumptuary laws. You'll notice the root of the word consumption. And so the high taxes on luxury goods and subsidies for plain and simple necessities. Rules to prevent the growth of industries that supply unnecessary needs. But we've forgotten the need for those, says Rousseau. And in our new orientation toward economic things, politicians now worry about the health of the consumer culture and general economic activity, even if that economic activity is directed more toward things that we don't need than things that we do. So switching columns. Luxury may be a sign of riches, and it leads to more riches. And so modern politicians think of that as a good thing. We'd like to see more and more malls going up, more high-rise buildings, and bigger and fancier and more respected hospitals, and all the things that go with luxurious society. But what's the value of that concentration? Well, it's a turning away from what really counts, the few simple things that are important, toward things that used to be private and somewhat suspect, indifferent at best, since going into business and making a lot of money is a private thing that helps you and is not public business. That is the things that help everyone. And this economic thinking is reductive. Politicians tend to rate their performance not in evaluating the virtue or happiness of their citizens or subjects, but by looking at their net worth or their annual salary, looking at the unemployment rate. And this is compounded then by the insurance industry, which takes a very low view of human life and adds to this general phenomenon by being able to put an explicit money value, dollar value, we would say back home, on human things. So it was in the 1970s, the insurance companies studied the matter and decided that one human life was worth something like $200,000. Later thinkers along these same lines have thought that this needs to be adjusted for inflation. Perhaps one human life is worth $1 million or $2 million. But in any case, there's a reduction of the human importance. If a car crash, and if there's a problem with a certain kind of automobile that leads to accidents, which ends human lives. How much would it be worth to fix that problem? How can you make the calculation of whether you should just go on producing these dangerous automobiles or fix the problem? Well, how much would it cost? If the problem is going to kill 10 people and it would take more than $20 million to fix, well, then the answer should be no. It's not cost effective to save those lives. That's a particular form of modern thinking, and it suggests progress. It's very brainy. It allows a clear and sure calculation of good and bad things. But of course, from any sensible or simple or virtuous human point of view, it's a very bad and wicked way to think about things, because it reduces our human importance to scientific qualities, which, no matter what there is to say for them, subtract what's most important. We treat human beings like herds of sheep or cows, when we should always remember that they are human beings. And just to think generally about this, consider the way we evaluate different countries these days and whether they're succeeding or failing. You might look, say, at the UN website, and I'm sure you can find there a list of the per capita income for countries around the world. How much money do the citizens of various places make, or probably can find from various NGOs or governmental organizations a list of spending on medical things. And we tend to think that it's the places on top, the expensive places, that are succeeding and that have the model that other countries should emulate, and the people at the bottom that are failing and need to follow the practices of the places on top. But might it be possible to look at that list with Rousseau's criterion and see that it's not so clear and perhaps even upside down? Why should we think the places that spend the most on medical care are the better places? Wouldn't that suggest that those are the least healthy places? Why do we think that the places with high incomes are good places? Wouldn't those be the places where people work hardest and spend more than they need to? But why would we think that ruining your life working hard for something you don't really need, why would we think that would be good? Or if you take one of Rousseau's favorite criteria, the growth of populations. Imagine you are looking at a list of the countries in the world rated according to how much money each individual person has in those countries. How much does the average person have in those countries? And then think you're measuring this by the criteria of who has the most children, thinking that is a positive and cheerful thing. Where do we find the people who are so happy with life and so content with themselves that what they most want to do is to make more people like themselves? And what are the countries where they seem to be reluctant to do this and so depressed and negative about life that they are disinterested in the next generation? So why is it that the places, say in Scandinavia, which are quite rich, have the lowest birth rates, and the highest birth rates seem to be at the bottom? Doesn't that mean that our politicians, with their economic outlook in life, are getting things somehow upside down? That they're thinking of themselves as succeeding when they're causing a dissatisfaction of life, to judge by the size of families, and unhealthy populations, to judge by how much medical care is needed.